Where does culture and cultural variation come from? Well, the answer to that is a lot of places. But the four places we're going to talk about today are group life, the environment, the resources that you can access given your environments, and the nature of the human mind. Through these four and other factors, culture and cultural variation arises. Let's start with group life. So, overall, one could say that culture is maintained and created because we live in groups. So, over the course of time, human beings have evolved to value social life. That early on, people who worked together were more likely to survive, and those who kind of did their own thing on their own, tried to tough it out on their own, had a lower chance of survival. So, as a result of these and other early factors in our growth as a species, we have become social beings, or beings that value and find positive emotions from living in groups, from interacting with people. Now, you can imagine that culture really comes only when you have someone to have a culture with. If culture is a group of people, you can't have culture as a group of people if you're not part of a group of people. If culture is what you learn from other people that changes your behaviors in the future, you can't learn anything from other people if you're not around other people. So in this way, culture is maintained and created because we are motivated as a species to live in groups. Second, cultural variation can come from a lot of different places, but one of those can be from the environments that different cultures find themselves in. Different climates, different environments require different means of survival. What you need to survive in the Arctic tundra is going to be different from what you need to survive in a desert or in a mountainous region. So thinking about hotter climates, what you need to survive in maybe, let's say, a desert or someplace where it gets much hotter on average compared to another place, you might have to dress differently. You might have to watch what types of food you eat, when you eat those types of food. You might also want to prioritize when you're active. This is one reason that some people think the kind of midday siesta is more common in regions that are much more warmer. It makes sense that your culture might develop a practice where you minimize the amount of time when you're outside during peak sun, during peak points of the day when it's super hot. So if it's super hot out, makes sense that part of your culture is about taking a break, spending it inside and out of the heat. Third, cultural variation might also come from the different resources that are available to you, depending on the environment that you're in. We'll talk about this in a later lecture, or at least we'll expand on it in a later lecture. But imagine if you have a culture that is in a place where it's mountainous, and all you have are goats and llamas, and if you didn't know, they can be difficult animals to work with. Or you're in a culture where the only animals available to you for domestication are huge tanks of things known as buffaloes. This is going to be a little different compared to other cultures where the animals that are available to them are like cows and sheep and other animals that aren't huge and tanky and have horns, but might be easier to domesticate. So off the bat, depending on the types of water, access to vegetation, to minerals, to different animals, these different resources might also shape how cultures differ from one another. So different available resources give you different opportunities. Unsurprising. Lastly, culture as it exists, as the way we define it, as groups of people and knowledge that gets passed on, exists because of human cognition, or the ability for humans to think in complex ways, to communicate ideas, to understand different people's perspectives, to understand that the other person has a different perspective, and to improve on the work of successive generations. Through the cognitive abilities that humans have, this allows us to have complex culture like we see and define in this class. We would not be able to have culture if we didn't have the language to communicate complex ideas and the ability to improve on those ideas. This improvement of cultural ideas, cultural norms, traditions, is known as the Ratchet Effect. And simply defined, this is when cultural information is learned, modified, and improved through generations upon generations. The idea is humans are one of the only species, and I think the only species, to really show this type of improvement, where you start with a tool and then each generation builds on that and changes it and improves it. While we see tool use in other species, we don't see this kind of improvement that, though we start with a stick, other species that use a stick as a tool might stay with a stick, and you don't see them innovating with that. Whereas we see among humans the ability to learn, modify, and improve on the information that we're given. So these 4 aspects are just some of the ways that culture can exist and why cultural variation might exist. Thinking about food and culture, why do you think some cultures use chopsticks, while others, it's more common to use a fork or a knife? Think about maybe resources or environment.